Hello, Croatian learners. Welcome to learncroatian.com. My name is Ines, and I would love to help you on your Croatian learning journey. Today, we are going to talk about a grammar feature in the Croatian language. This is a grammar feature which is not only present in Croatian, it's present in other languages, especially European languages as well, such as German or Spanish, Italian. However, it's no longer present in English, although the Old English also had this grammar feature, but it hasn't had it for a while. Let's talk today about grammatical genders.
We will talk about the grammatical gender in three parts. First, what is a grammatical gender? Second, how to determine the grammatical gender in Croatian. And third, why do I need to learn about genders in Croatian? Let's start with the first one. What is a grammatical gender?
For English speakers, a grammatical gender may be something that's a little bit difficult to grasp, but it really isn't. Let's see what a grammatical gender is exactly. So if we talk about genders in the general term, we think of social genders, right? We think of male or female. And we have all the living or the majority of the living organisms are classified into these two groups, male or female. Well, think of the same way. Think of all the nouns in a language being classified into three groups. Now, Croatian language has three genders. We talk about feminine or female, masculine or male, and neuter, which is neither male or female. So when you think about the grammatical gender, think about all the nouns in a language being separated into these three categories. So what does it mean that the nouns are classified into these three groups? Masculine, feminine, and neuter. Well, when we talk about gender, grammatical gender is primarily a grammar feature which is ascribed to nouns. Now, this will also affect some other words that appear with the nouns or describe a noun, such as an adjective, or maybe substitute a noun, like pronouns. Now, it's important to know this grammar feature when you're learning Croatian because, as you will see later, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, they change their form to adjust to the gender which they are ascribed to. We will see later in a couple of examples how endings or suffixes of the words change. So in order to understand that, you have to learn more about genders and how they affect nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and some other words as well. So let's move on to the next question. How do you determine a gender of the noun? Well, there are a couple of simple ways that you can determine the gender in Croatian. Let's start with the easiest one. Some nouns that name human beings, like a woman, a man, a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister, these nouns will follow their natural disposition. So what you would usually describe as a female, these nouns would be feminine, such as žena, a woman, or sestra, a sister, or a daughter, kći. Or they would be masculine, like man, čovjek, or brother, brat, and so on. But not everything has their natural disposition, right? What about objects? What about a table or a ball or a glass? It would be really funny, wouldn't it, if you would refer to a ball like a she, or if you were to refer to a table like a he. Well, this is sort of what happens in Croatian. So let's see, how can we tell? How do we determine the gender in these nouns, especially in objects or in the natural things like the sun, the rain? How can you determine their gender? Well, see, it's very important if you really want to learn the grammar, it's important to pay attention to the root of the word and to the endings of the words or the suffixes. Majority of all the words basically are made in a way that you use the root word and then you add certain endings to it. Well, in nouns are no different. Nouns have different endings, and these endings, these suffixes, are exactly what we need that will tell us what gender a certain noun is. So let's go step by step. Let's talk about all the nouns which are feminine. Okay, so let's talk about the feminine nouns. I would call this an A rule because the majority of the nouns that end on vowel A will be feminine nouns. You've already heard me say a couple of them. You've heard žena or sestra, but also nouns like lopta, olovka, pravda. See, all these nouns end on a letter A, and they are all feminine. Now, Croatian is a complex language. You might have heard it. You might have heard me say it before, and it is true. Croatian grammar is complex. So every time we talk about a rule, I have to mention a couple of the exceptions to the rules. Now, there are a few nouns which end on an A, but these are not feminine nouns. These are masculine nouns. These nouns are like mladoženja or gazda, kolega. Now, these are just a few nouns. A majority of the nouns that end on A are feminine. Again, there are nouns that actually don't end on an A, but are feminine as well. These nouns end on a consonant. This is something that's common for masculine nouns. Now, there is a group of nouns like noć or večer, kost, and so on, which end on a consonant but are feminine nouns. Now, you would need to remember what these are. You just don't have to sit down and memorize a list of nouns. Actually, the best way to learn grammar features is when you learn them through learning different phrases or different sentences. You might read different sentences in a text and notice that certain nouns reappear and that the words around them change their form in the same way. So this is the best way to learn grammar, actually, to kind of learn it naturally as you learn phrases or sentences. But if you do want to know what these nouns are, in our article, you can see a short list of the nouns that end in a consonant but are actually feminine. Another way that you would recognize feminine nouns that end on a consonant is if a noun ends on a OST. Now, it's still a consonant, but every noun that has this ending, ost, will also be feminine. It's not very hard, and this is the biggest, maybe the biggest exception in the feminine nouns would be the nouns that end on a consonant but are actually feminine, or the couple of nouns that do end on an A but are actually masculine. Another exception are male names in Croatian, such as Luka or Matija, Nikola. These are all male names in Croatian. They're very common in Croatia, actually. So you can just follow the rule of the natural disposition. These are all male names, so of course, all male names will be masculine. Let's talk about masculine nouns. Now, when we were talking about the feminine nouns, you heard me say that all the nouns which end on a consonant are more than likely masculine. There are a few exceptions, like I said, with feminine nouns, where a noun ends on ost, meaning it's a feminine noun, or where some nouns will end on a consonant but are actually feminine. Another example of an exception is in the names, in the male names, like Luka and Matija and Nikola. There are other exceptions. For instance, there's a word auto, which actually a lot of parts of Croatia and in some of the parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, this noun is thought to be both masculine and or neuter. However, this noun is only masculine, although it ends on an O. So, as you can see, masculine nouns are quite easy. If it ends on a consonant, it's more than likely it's a masculine noun. Let's talk about neuter nouns. These nouns are also quite easy to recognize in Croatian. For instance, if a noun ends on an O, or if it ends on an E, these nouns are neuter nouns. So when we say neuter, it means it's neither masculine nor feminine. And so I would, let's say you would substitute it with the word it. So it's neither he or she, it's an it. So all these nouns that end on an O or E, these are neuter nouns. Now, again, there are a couple of exceptions. You can say that there are male names, common male names, which end on an O, like Marco or Ivo, but these are obviously masculine nouns. But again, they follow their natural disposition. So when you try to tell what is the noun, what is the gender of the noun, try to see if you can find their natural disposition first, and then follow these rules: the A rule, the consonant rule, or the OE rule, and you will easily be able to determine which gender is ascribed to each noun. So let's talk about something else which is also affected by this grammar feature, the grammatical gender. Notice the words like a friend or a teacher, a colleague, a spouse. In English, you need to specify if you're talking about a woman or a man when you say these words. Well, in Croatian, you have two words to describe one noun. And in Croatian, you can immediately tell if you're talking about a woman or a man. So if a noun is feminine or masculine. Now, when you learn words in Croatian, you would more than likely learn them in their masculine form, in the masculine gender. Now, to form this other word, the feminine noun, you would use the masculine form, but then you would add suffixes. The most common suffix is ica or ica. So, for instance, a word for a male teacher is učitelj. A word for a female teacher is učiteljica. A word for a male friend is prijatelj. A word for a female friend is prijateljica, and so on. The majority of these feminine words will have the same suffix ica, ica. Now, there are three different suffixes that you can use, and these are ka, inja, or kinja, like, for instance, a word judge is sudac, but the female judge is sutkinja. So there are different words like this as well, and you would need to learn which suffix you would need to use. But if you see any of the four suffixes in the text, know that it's talking about the feminine nouns. Okay, so let's summarize everything that you have just heard. If we're talking about a noun which ends on a consonant, more than likely that noun is going to be masculine. If a noun ends on an A, more than likely is going to be feminine. Now, there are some exceptions, some words which end on an A, like tata, a dad, which is a masculine, or male names which also end on an A, like Nicola, but they're also masculine, or words which end on a consonant but are actually feminine. And these are maybe up to 100 words which don't follow this rule. But again, Don't just memorize a list of words, learn them as you learn the language, and you'll notice these changes immediately. And now the neuter nouns are all the nouns that end on an O or an E, and this will be easy to identify. Now there are some exceptions to this rule, like word auto, which is a car. This is a masculine noun, or male names like Ivo, which are also masculine nouns. Okay, so following these three simple rules, you will be able to determine the gender of the noun. Now let's talk about why do you need to learn the genders? Why is it so important for Croatian language? So why do you need to learn the genders in Croatian? When you learn nouns, just as if you memorize a list of words, it's not really that important if you know which gender each noun is. However, when you start making your own sentences, this is when knowing gender is really important. For example, this mostly refers to adjectives and pronouns, like I have said earlier. So let's look at an example of the following sentence. This restaurant is expensive. In Croatian, this sentence would sound like this. Ovaj restoran je skup. Now notice in this sentence that the subject of the sentence is the noun restaurant, restoran. In Croatian, this noun is masculine. Notice it ends on a consonant, so it's masculine. This means that both the pronoun, this, ovaj, and the adjective, expensive, or skup, also have to be masculine in order to correctly refer to the noun in the sentence. You will notice that the adjective skup also ends on a consonant. This means that in the majority of cases, the adjective will follow the same rule of gender as a noun. Now do be careful. This is especially important with the feminine nouns and feminine adjectives. They don't always follow the same rule. But in masculine, a lot of the times the masculine adjective would also end on a consonant, just like a masculine noun ends on a consonant. Now, in the masculine adjectives, sometimes if you really want to specify that this expensive restaurant, you would add a suffix I at the end. So you would say ovaj skupi restoran. Now, this happens sometimes when you really want to emphasize the description of the noun. So if you really want to specify that the restaurant is expensive, you would first put the adjective before the noun and you would add this ending I. But for the majority of cases, the adjectives which refer to masculine nouns also end on a consonant. Now let's talk about the feminine. In the same way, in a sentence, if we have a feminine subject, the adjective and the pronoun would also refer to this noun in feminine as well. So let's look at another example sentence. For instance, this ticket is expensive. In Croatian, we would say it like this. Ova karta je skupa. Now notice that the pronoun changed from ovaj to ova. And notice it also ends on an A. Also, if we now look at the adjective skup, it's no longer skup, it's skupa. Notice it also ends on an A. Remember the A rule in feminine nouns? Well, use this rule every time when you want to use adjective in its feminine form. So be careful here though, because as you remember, some nouns don't end on an A, but the adjective which refers to a feminine noun will always end on an A. So no worries there, you won't make a mistake. Just know that nouns like noć or večer or kost are all feminine nouns, and you need to use an A ending for the adjectives. Now, for the sentences which have a neuter noun as a subject, well, that's also very easy. Remember that neuter nouns usually end on O or E, right? So the adjectives and the pronouns would also end mostly on O and sometimes on E. Well, let's look at this example sentence. This milk is expensive. In Croatian, we would say it like this. Ovo mlijeko je skupo. Now notice the subject of the sentence is milk. You will see that in Croatian, a word mlijeko ends on an O, which means it is a neuter gender. Well, you will notice that both the pronoun and the adjective also end on an O, ovo and skupo. Now use these rules when you make your own phrases or your own sentences with adjectives and pronouns to determine which gender they need to refer to or which gender they need to reflect. Now remember, all of these rules refer to the nouns in their most basic form, and their most basic form is called nominative. Well, this is also one of the 7 forms or one of the 7 cases in Croatian. I will cover this in another video, but also remember that when you learn Croatian, you will see nouns with very different endings, but these endings will reflect these different cases in which they can be. But for now, it's important when you learn words in nominative, which is their basic form, you follow these rules and you can make sure that you will not make a mistake. Happy learning, everybody. And if you have any questions or suggestions or comments, if you want to know something about some other grammatical feature and you would like me to talk about it, please contact us or write down in the comments below, and I would love to help you. Please let me know if you need any help with learning Croatian. Croatian may be a little bit difficult, but don't worry, you can master it. There are so many people who already have, and it is fun. Remember, I'm here for you, so if you need any help, don't hesitate to contact us. Good luck with learning Croatian, or as we would say, sretno. See you next time. Until then, bye-bye.